Every year, on the 3rd of May, the Church of England celebrates the life of Henry Vaughan, a person born in 1622. Vaughan was a physician poet, a member of that group of spiritual writers known as the metaphysical poets, whose group includes the likes of John Donne and George Herbert. Vaughan knew at personal cost what it is to suffer. He lived during the time of civil war, a war in which he endured the execution of his king, Charles I, the suppression of his church by Oliver Cromwell, and the death of his young wife. His poetry reflects on the events of his life and, to quote from an article about him, shows an intense awareness of the divine meanings in ordinary things. During the weeks and months we have spent in lockdown, socially distanced and perhaps even isolated from those we know and love, many of us will have experienced the suffering at close hand. Some of us may be experiencing anxiety about the present and fear for the future, and that is not surprising. Some of us will have experienced the loss of family members or friends, and will have been prevented from saying goodbye to them in ways that we find meaningful and dignified, prevented from attending services of worship, or even from entering a church for private prayer. These are times when we might even struggle to hold close that faith we have nurtured throughout our lives. However, it is during times of suffering and loss, during periods of anxiety and fear, and on occasions when the future looks uncertain, that God is closest to us. God comes to us in our times of distress. Whether we know it or not, God is forever present beside us and within us. At such times, we need to remember those events we commemorated and celebrated in Easter last year, and will commemorate and celebrate again in a few months' time at Easter this year. For it is within the crucifixion of Jesus that we see and know God most clearly, God who was revealed to us through the suffering of Jesus on the cross. The disciples knew suffering and loss, fear, anxiety, and isolation. Following the crucifixion of Jesus, they faced an uncertain future. However, they hung on to hope, hope brought about by the witnessing of the resurrection. They did not necessarily understand what was happening at the time. Indeed, why would they? Yet they realized that something good had come out of bad. The events of Easter Sunday had brought light to the dark world of Good Friday. The resurrection of Jesus had brought light to the dark world of the crucifixion. In a reading from Acts chapter 2, verse 42 onwards, we are told that the disciples did what they could to hold their community together, sharing what they had with others in need, praying together as best they could, and breaking bread in their own houses. In this reading, Luke describes to us the important actions for keeping our faith alive, reading or listening to the teachings of Jesus, caring and nurturing the life of the community, praying, and the breaking of bread. During these many months, we have been brought into fellowship with those early disciples who suddenly found themselves cast adrift by the crucifixion of Jesus. At a time when the followers of Jesus were small in number, there were no church buildings, and when the priestly formalities of the Eucharist through an established church were yet to materialize, they struggled onto the hope brought by the resurrection. Yet they persevered because they had faith that the future held a promise of something better, a promise brought by the resurrection of Jesus. In a reading from 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 19 to the end, we are reminded that the hope brought to us by Jesus, the same hope that held those disciples together in the early days following that first Easter, is a hope available to us all. Peter reminds us that we all have self-worth and dignity, regardless of our personal situations in life, even amidst times of personal suffering. Peter's invitation to us is to make the story of the suffering of Jesus our own story. By making the events of that first Easter a pattern within our own lives, to hold them close to us, and to find that faith exhibited by the first disciples, we too will be rescued and healed. All of this is summarized in the words of John's Gospel, chapter 10, verses 1 to 10. Jesus said, "I came so that they could have life, yes, and have it full to overflowing." The they he refers to is us, those who have faith in the risen Christ and who look to him for the hope of a bright future. Those of us who seek to have a close relationship with God through Jesus Christ. The promise of that full life is just as pertinent, just as relevant to us today as it was at the time Jesus first spoke those words. It is a promise that we need to remember whilst we suffer our lockdown and isolation, during which time we find that the materialistic aspects of life are not what we need most for a life of richness and contentment. Indeed, lockdown is a time when we are given the luxury of being able to move closer to God, because, in the words of T.S. Eliot, we are no longer distracted from distraction by distraction. We have the time to read and listen to the Scriptures, to pray, to try to assist the members of our community in need, and, albeit by spiritual extension through the power of the Internet, to participate in the breaking of bread. It is a time when our faith allows us to look again at how we live our lives as people of God, as followers of Jesus Christ, and to truly renew that sense of hope within us, as promised by the resurrection of Jesus. Henry Vaughan discovered the power held within the cross, within the crucifixion of Jesus, and he understood the light, hope, and peace that has been brought to us all by it. He wrote his poem, The World, at a time of great suffering around him. However, the opening lines read as follows: "I saw eternity the other night, like a great ring of pure and endless light, as calm as it was bright." Those words are not just a way out of the present. They are words that help us through the present time. Eternity does not start somewhere or sometime in the future. It started before the world was formed. It may seem dark at present, but there is actually light all around us. A light that was present before lockdown, and a light that will still be there after lockdown. It is a light that remains present during lockdown. To see that light and feel the hope that it brings, we need to act like those first disciples, to listen to the teachings of Jesus, to pray, and to support our community. And we need to become more intensely aware of the divine meanings in ordinary things. Put simply, we need to have the strength of faith.